Okay, so diving into this next piece then, and hopefully this will kind of create a context. We did a lot about the webs and those pieces. Now we're going to try to dive into it. So this quote, and if you're thinking about that assessment piece, and remember the questions that I started you off with around how does the thinking from the homework get you thinking about the assessment that you're generating, but then also then about the question and how do the two interact. And I think that speaks well to, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So thinking about that path or what we're going, the direction we're moving. So assessment with a purpose. So we have curriculum, we have instruction, then the assessment part, right? And that's why we're here. Digging into this and getting deeper with this. And again, in the MAC stuff, it came out evident as a big idea to consider, and they went into great detail in getting those pieces put together. So here's a little graphic around how you get into this piece. We have a desired temperature, so we have the target. Then we go into that instruction piece. Based on that instruction, we make the adjustments we think we need to make to get to that desired temperature, but then at some point we've got to check the temperature. If the temperature is at the desired or not at the desired, then you loop back to what are the tweaks or adjustments we need to make to get to that adjusted temperature, where if it is the temperature we're looking for, we move on, maybe say the next room or the next piece. But following this loop and getting through this loop, and what does this look like? What are the pieces of a purposeful assessment? Okay, so some of these things we've gone through, but just one more touch on them. That intended curriculum and those actual learning targets. I think this is a challenge sometimes, especially with the social studies standards as they are, because they're very large. And a lot of times a standard, if you will, has multiple targets within it. And so how are we digging in, not just multiple targets, but maybe targets that have different approaches that need to be taken or thinking that need to be involved in order to get to the meanings of those targets, even though it's all written in the same piece. So how are we getting there? How are we pushing ourselves to that level? And so what is it we intend to do, and then what is it we're actually doing to pull that out? And this kind of gets into that the purposeful instruction, if you will. So this idea of a test blueprint, this really resonated for me, and I talked a little bit to Becky about this before, but I'm just going to kind of speak to you how it speaks to me, and again, based on what I heard from David and other things, and see what this becomes. We've talked a lot about when you look at those assessment items that were created from last year's group and what that comes with. So to me, I'm thinking to myself, okay, you come tasked with creating a selected response, a constructed response, and a performance task, right? That's what you're going to create as the end product. That would then go to a bank. When I think of pulling from that bank, though, I think of what are the questions I'm pulling from that bank. Most currently, we really hang our hat on, well, these are the standards I'm assessing. But there's another layer to it, and that's kind of what we're digging into here is, what is it that standard speaks to? And what is it that question articulates as far as determining what kids know based on the standard that I'm doing? So I think there's a little bit deeper thinking that goes into it. So yes, we can create questions, but if we're creating just these separate questions, we're possibly creating them out of context. And if somebody is creating a question out of a certain context and I take it and I use it, is the true context of that question going to work for me? And I think I heard some of the conversations this morning as you were reading that, and I think it was articulated in some of the share out you did when you said something along the lines of, well, it depends on if this is a pre-test maybe or a formative or summative, right? Well, it depends on how maybe you view the targets from that content when you deliver it. You probably have a different perspective on maybe what the summative end goal is or what the formative piece might be along that way. How much is it you're really expecting the kids to know around that concept? Maybe your emphasis is on a different aspect of the standard. Even though it aligns to that standard, there might be something else that you're putting more emphasis on. So really getting into this blueprint and what that looks like. So what does common assessment look like? How does it go forward? So plan through that. learning targets, and then the thing that we talked about a lot about the last time we were together, that depth of knowledge, so that level of complexity. The learning target piece, you've done a lot of work on that if you look at unwrapping and different things, but that level of complexity is in there. Then we get to importance. Anyone know what that's been called? What is that? What?
Is it relevant?
Yeah, well, relevance comes into play with importance, absolutely. What was the movement?
Well, student growth.
Student growth, looking at student growth. But what is important? Like, so when we look at student growth, what is important? I heard essential, or we called the term priority, right? Really digging into the priority. What is it we need? The priority standards movement, really? So, yes, we've got this laundry list of standards, but then we had the priority standards, right? So what is the importance of the standards or the learning targets that we're pulling from? And then the common assessments work best within this collegial process, so working together. And this becomes especially clear if, from what we just talked through, let's say your department creates a U.S. history assessment. If there are certain points of the standard that you're emphasizing more than your colleagues, if you haven't built that assessment together, but yet you have a common assessment, students are inevitably going to show weaknesses on certain standards, probably because you didn't necessarily stress the importance of that. But if you've built that assessment together and agreed on what those important points are, it isn't that you can't talk about those other things, it's that you know that these are the certain things that are deemed the most important, and it isn't just you in your own classroom making that determination. It's your department or your group. And that's why we're doing this work together, trying to really flesh through all that, which will hopefully then, by working on it as teams and looking at and reviewing the items, kind of feed out what you're seeing in some of these samples are, wow, this is real specific and it only fits in this context. Because the more we talk and the more we broaden our perspective of what the real learning target is, it's going to help us create a question that gets more to the skills and how those skills are applied around whatever content is introduced. Okay, so in learning targets then, we have our state and our national standards, and then again, we've got these decisions that we need to make. Then we get into the depth of knowledge piece, the cognitive complexity. We went into Webb's, and we went through the recall, and I think we really did a good job of reviewing this morning by looking at those questions. I saw people pulling out your handouts from before to pull out your evidence to prove the different depth of knowledge that you were putting in there. I think we're at a real good place with that. The part that I think we're going to find to be a challenge, and I did hear this, is once we put it into application, trying to A, get our questions to that level, or B, if we get them to that level, how do we get our students to be able to apply themselves at that level? And so there's two kind of things working there with that. But it's obviously complexity is a very important element of this. So